Hello guys, Ancient Gameplays, I'm Fabio Pisco.
Who?
As for today, I'm recording outside as you can hear, of course. I'm a bit, and I was kind of sick. I'm still kind of sick, but I still wanted to bring you this video, so that's what I'm doing right now. And you have chickens here, you have the dogs, you have the cats, you have the cat and so on, and that's why I'm recording outside. I actually needed a bit of fresh air, so I mixed together both the hunger and the will to eat. Yeah. As for this video, after 6 months I bring you a new GPU comparison, and yeah, this is the first video right now where in this channel we're gonna have rasterization, ray tracing, virtual reality benchmarked, productivity, and frame generation. But before, let's generate our sponsor.
Today's video sponsor is GVG Mall,
Bringing you lots of software deals like Windows 10, Windows 11, Office 2019 or 2021 with a new Windows 11 design, and for all of these you can use my SKG discount code for 30% off, getting a Windows 11 serial key for $22 and a Windows 10 one for only $15. Then use the key on your Windows settings and you'll have an activated system. And basically it all resumes itself to which card should you get? Let's talk about pricing. In US you can get the RX 7900 XT for roughly $650, which is a crazy good deal. Then we have the 7900 XTX, and sorry for the cars, at $869, and then the RTX 4080 Super at $1,029, and this was actually the best price that I could find. Usually it is $200 over the XTX. As for European prices, we start with the 7900 XT at 689 euros, which is actually again a very nice deal. Then we have the XTX at 909 euros, and then the 4080 Super at 1089 euros. So with this being said, which card should you get? Let's find out. Starting with Cinebench R24, we have the 4080 Super obliterating both AMD cards, being up to 84% faster than the 7900 XTX and up to twice as fast as the 7900 XT. This could be improved with ROCm, of course, but you do need the Linux subsystem, while with the NVIDIA card it's basically just plug and play. As we go into Premiere 2024 with a budget benchmark, things are much more on par, and we now have the 4080 Super being the fastest card for sure, but by a way smaller margin, with both AMD cards performing almost the same here, somehow, which is odd, but is happening. And before starting with the image generation benchmark, I must tell you that Procyon seems to not use AMD cards to their full extent, as other software like S.T.A.L.K.E.R, for example, will deliver considerably better results when generating images of the same size. In here we have the 4080 Super being much faster, even when using ONNX, being up to 64% faster than the 7900 XTX. And if you use the Tensor-RT, the results get even higher, over 2 times faster. This means that while the 7900 XTX takes around 3 seconds to generate one image, the 4080 Super takes always less than 2, going as low as 1.4 seconds if you're using Tensor-RT. Now I bring you VR benchmarks for the first time on this channel with VR Mark, and I want to thank Benchmarks for sending me a key to their software so I could bring you these tests. As for the results, we're testing the Orange Room, which is aimed at the performance levels needed for the HTC Vive and Oculus Rift, and the 3 cards are performing exceptionally well, with the 4080 Super being the faster card here, of course, but by only 8%. The Blue Room is called the high bar for feature hardware, and believe it or not, here the 7900 XTX is the fastest card, surpassing the RTX 4080 Super by 11%. 4080 Super that is basically on par with the 7900 XT, which is not something that we usually see. Interesting results here, if you ask me. And the last productivity benchmark here is Blender Open Data, where the AMD cards just get demolished once again, especially since we don't really have ROCm natively on Windows, which makes the 4080 Super be over twice as fast as the 7900 XTX with just plug and play. And that's a huge difference productivity-wise. As for gaming, we start with Assetto Corsa at 1080p, and we have both the 7900 XT and XTX performing around the same, 213-215 FPS, which indicates a driver bottleneck here somehow. At 1440p though, the differences get shortened, and the 7900 XTX now matches the 4080 Super at around 190 FPS, but delivering slightly higher 1% lows. But as we move to 4K, the 4080 Super gets a bit more ground again, being the fastest card. Even the $650 7900 XT is able to deliver 89 FPS at 4K maximum settings when tweaked, making it an outstanding price performance card. And people constantly ask me to test Counter-Strike 2 GPU-wise, God knows why, and here I am, doing this so you don't have to. At 1080p we have the 7900 XTX being the fastest card, but only by a very small margin, with the tweaked 7900 XT being close to the stock 4080 Super. At 1440p things are more or less the same, with both top-tier cards being, well, more or less tied at around 480 FPS, with the 7900 XT still doing a very good job, and at 4K the FPS, well, just go down quite a lot, making the 4080 Super the fastest card, but again, only by a very small margin versus the 7900 XTX. And now we have another requested game, Call of Duty Black Ops 6. At 1080p we have all GPUs delivering very good results at extreme settings, with the 7900 XTX being the fastest GPU by a small margin, and of course the 7900 XT delivering 95% of the 4080 Super's performance. And at 1440p the 7900 XT just gets better, now being on par with the 4080 Super, sometimes costing twice as much, the 4080 Super of course. And it just gets worse for the 4080 Super at 4K, now being surpassed by the 7900 XT, with the 7900 XTX being 15% faster than its little brother and 18% faster than the 4080 Super. And now we're testing Cyberpunk 2077, but in a very crowded area, where even the 9800X 3D was bottlenecking these cards at 1080p. But as soon as the GPU needs to do some heavy work, the 7900 XTX outmatches the 4080 Super by 7%, being also virtually matched by the $650 RX 7900 XT. Oof. And as we go to 4K, it just gets humiliating for the 4080 Super, that is now 15% slower than the 7900 XT, with the 7900 XTX being the only card able to deliver 60 average FPS here. Hogwarts Legacy is another game where the AMD cards perform quite well, and at 1080p we have the $650 RX 7900 XT outmatching the $1100 RTX 4080 Super once more, something that does not change at 1440p, at least if you tweak the card of course, where the 7900 XTX for example is now 14% faster than the 4080 Super, while also delivering consistently better smoothness. And that only changes at 4K, where the NVIDIA card still gets humiliated, being even slower than the tweaked 7900 XT, but at least delivers very good 1% lows this time. As we go to Microsoft Flight Simulator, we finally see the 4080 Super matching the 7900 XTX once again, but delivering lower 1% lows. And the trend continues at 1440p, where the 4080 Super is now 4% faster than the 7900 XTX, but delivers quite lower 1% lows. And that only changes at 4K, where the 4080 Super finally shows itself as the best card in all scenarios, delivering higher averages and higher 1% lows than the 7900 XTX at 4K. And now we're testing Alan Wake 2 in the new The Lake House DLC. At 1080p we get the 4080 Super being once again pressured by the $650 7900 XT, and the NVIDIA card does need 1440p in order to outmatch the 7900 XT by roughly 6%, but still loses to the 7900 XTX by roughly the same amount. At 4K the scales get maintained, with the 4080 Super now virtually matching the 7900 XTX, and with no card being able to deliver 60 FPS without upscaling. Bummer. Black Myth Wukong is one of the best titles I've played in years, and I really enjoyed it. At 1080p the NVIDIA outmatches the 7900 XTX by 13%, the NVIDIA card of course, and it is clear that the AMD still has some issues with this title, as the XTX is barely outperforming its little brother, which doesn't really make much sense. Something that doesn't really change much at 1440p honestly, but with the 7900 XTX now shortening the difference in between the 4080 Super from 13% to 8%. And at 4K, or in this case 1440p upscaled to 4K, the 4080 Super is still the fastest card, now being 9% faster than the 7900 XTX, that is also 9% faster than its little brother here. Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora is one of those titles like Star Wars Outlaws or the recently released Indiana Jones, where ray tracing is always enabled by some extent. And this is why we see the 4080 Super being 21% faster than the 7900 XTX and 30% faster than the 7900 XT. As the resolution goes up, the 7900 XTX gets a bit more ground, but still underperforms compared to the 4080 Super. And at 4K, the 7900 XTX shortens the difference to only 15%, still being able to deliver 65 average FPS, which is honestly way better than I thought it would be. When Starfield came out, it was performing much better on the AMD side overall, but after several updates we see the 4080 Super outmatching the 7900 XTX that is again barely faster than the 7900 XT. Once again odd, but real. As we go to 1440p, the 4080 Super is now 7% faster than the 7900 XTX, which is not that much honestly. And at 4K, we finally get the 7900 XTX matching the 4080 Super, but delivering slightly higher 1% lows, with even the 7900 XT delivering almost 60 average FPS without any kind of upscaling or frame generation. S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2 is a new addition to the benchmarks, and here we have some very interesting results, where the 4080 Super delivers 11% more average FPS than the 7900 XTX, but also 17% lower 1% lows, even lower than the ones that we have with the 7900 XT at 1080p. At 1440p things get more stable for the NVIDIA card, that is now performing considerably better, and remember that the closest the 1% lows are to the averages, the smoother the gameplay will be. And even though the AMD cards have lower FPS here, they will deliver a smoother gameplay, something that still happens at 4K. But this time, the NVIDIA card is the only one actually able to deliver close to 60 average FPS without any kind of upscaling. This game was made for the PS5 that, as we all know, has an AMD RDNA 2 card, and even being made with an AMD card in mind, it works better on the 4080 Super that is 11% faster than the RX 7900 XTX. Although, we should note again that the 1% lows are better on the AMD cards here, something that gets much more relevant at 1440p, where the 4080 Super is only 5% faster on average, but also 16% slower in the 1% lows. And when we increase the resolution to 4K, the 7900 XTX finally matches the 4080 Super, being only 3 FPS slower on average, but delivering 11 FPS more in the 1% lows. Silent Hill 2. My goodness, this game is a crap in terms of optimization. And don't get me wrong, because I've played the game to the end, but these developers didn't even implement GPU culling properly, and the traversal stutters are a huge crap, being of course much worse on the AMD cards running the 24.12.1 drivers. At 1440p this shit gets even worse, with the 1% lows now getting below the 60 average FPS mark or below the 60 FPS mark, which is unacceptable for me, and at 4K, my god. The 4080 Super is not only 15% faster on average than the 7900 XTX, as it also delivers much better gameplay smoothness here. And don't get me wrong, this game will stutter with any card, but it will stutter more with the AMD ones. Space Marine 2 is another new addition like many other games, and even though this is an AMD sponsored title, we see the 4080 Super being, at 1080p, 9% faster than the 7900 XTX and 20% faster than the 7900 XT. But the show immediately ends at 1440p, where the NVIDIA card is still slightly faster, I would say, but the AMD ones deliver a much smoother experience, with the 7900 XTX delivering 16% higher 1% lows. At 4K the NVIDIA card does get a bit more ground in the 1% lows of course, but now it isn't faster on the averages anymore. And it is still slower in the 1% lows compared to the 7900 XTX. That is now of course the fastest card. Getting closer to the final line we have Hellblade 2, another one of those titles like Alan Wake 2 that is very demanding on any system, but somehow the developers forgot to have FSR frame generation. Classic. As for the results, the AMD cards are once again delivering higher 1% lows compared to the NVIDIA one, something that does not change at 1440p, where the 4080 Super barely delivers more average FPS than the 7900 XTX, but delivers a lot less 1% lows. And at 4K, well, at 4K the RX 7900 XTX simply shortens the difference even more, being virtually on par with the RTX 4080 Super, but again, delivering higher 1% lows. That of course translates into a higher or better gameplay smoothness. And now we finally have the 15 games averages at 1080p, 1440p and 4K stock settings, with the RTX 4080 Super being 4% faster than the 7900 XTX at 1080p, 3% faster at 1440p and 2% faster at 4K, which is fairly nothing considering it costs much more. And if we tweak all the cards to the values that most people can get, we have the RTX 4080 Super now being 4% faster at 1080p, 1% faster at 1440p and 0.5% faster at 4K. And while I believe that by this time some people believed that the RTX 4080 Super would be considerably faster than the 7900 XTX, especially since it is around $200 more expensive, or up to $200 more expensive, and only has 16GB of VRAM. And I believe that there will be some of you as well that will be saying, well, but what about ray tracing? The RTX 4080 Super is really much better is when it comes to ray tracing. Ray tracing, you say? Let's go. Starting with Cyberpunk 2077 here, and these results might seem confusing, but it's basically non-ray tracing results in the black bars and ray tracing results on the colored ones. At 1080p we have the 4080 Super not being, well, much faster than the 7900 XTX without ray tracing, but as soon as we enable it, the 4080 Super gets to be 62% faster, difference that gets reduced to 30% by enabling upscaling on both cards. At 1440p we start seeing some interesting results, with the NVIDIA card being so much more efficient here that it delivers the same FPS with ray tracing and DLSS quality that it does at native without ray tracing. In this case, being 55% faster than the 7900 XTX, upscaling versus upscaling. And for people running a 4080 Super and a 4K panel, they know that now they can run ray tracing with the DLSS quality and it will deliver 32% more FPS than playing at 4K native, with the DLSS quality at 4K looking very good. And of course, with the AMD cards being much slower here. Although as we go to a lighter ray tracing scenario with Resident Evil 4, we have the AMD cards faring quite well, with the 7900 XTX being faster than the 4080 Super without ray tracing and matching it with it activated. And it gets more surprising at 1440p, where the 7900 XTX outmatches the 4080 Super even with ray tracing activated. And the 7900 XT matches it with ray tracing off, showing how much the RE engine loves the AMD cards. And of course, jumping to 1440p ultra-wide just shows more of the same, with the AMD cards dominating here in this light ray tracing scenario. And I've been seeing many people talking about AMD's poor performance in The Witcher 3, but I beg to differ. Here I am using Ultra Plus settings, and for ray tracing, I'm using global illumination set to performance, which I believe to be the best option here unless you have a 4090, and ray tracing ambient occlusion as well, alongside FSR or DLSS quality. And as you can see, the AMD cards not only perform very well at 1080p, as they do the same at 1440p, where the 7900 XTX is 10% faster than the 4080 Super in rasterization and still matches it in ray tracing. And even at 4K the results are pretty impressive for the AMD cards, proving that it is just not about how AMD is way worse in ray tracing, but also about how the game is optimized to run ray tracing on AMD GPUs. Remember of Alan Wake that implemented everything on the NVIDIA side like ray reconstruction, but didn't even implement FSR frame generation? Well, the game uses path tracing, which is an improved ray tracing version that calculates a lot more bouncing of the lights and so on. And here, Jesus, the 4080 Super is slower in rasterization, but 2.25 times faster than the 7900 XTX when running path tracing. And NVIDIA's ace here is ray reconstruction, that delivers a huge performance increase when activated, and that's why we see these performances differences that just get worse at 1440p, as you see, with the AMD cards delivering 20-something FPS even with FSR, and at 4K, where of course they deliver a little over 10 FPS, where the RTX 4080 Super delivers almost 40 in the same exact scenario, but of course with ray reconstruction. And now that we have productivity, rasterization, ray tracing, we're going into frame generation. And again, we're not comparing quality, we're not comparing the quality of the DLSS frame generation or FSR frame generation, we're comparing the smoothness addition. And a lot of people might say what they want, whatever they want, but for me, FSR 3 frame generation is better than NVIDIA DLSS frame generation, especially in low tier cards. Because if you're comparing lower tier cards, DLSS frame generation just doesn't really work as it should, and it is in some scenarios a piece of crap. But well, let's see how both frame generation technologies work now. As for Space Marine 2 at 1080p, you can see that even though both the RX 7900 XTX and the RTX 4080 Super perform around the same natively, when using frame generation, the AMD card delivers 15% more FPS, or 15% more smoothness, but most importantly, keeps its 1% lows high. And the same happens at 1440p, where even the 7900 XT can deliver much more smoothness than the 4080 Super when enabling frame generation. I believe the reason the 4080 delivers bad 1% lows here is because we are using 4K textures and the 16GB VRAM just weren't enough for those textures, plus frame generation. And that's why it gets even worse at 4K. And I saw some texture popping when using 4K textures on the 4080 Super at higher resolutions even without frame generation. That's how much VRAM, well, matters in some scenarios. And this is something where the 20GB 7900 XT and the 24GB 7900 XTX don't really have any issues. Moving to S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2, we see more of the same, and now we don't really have 4K textures. Once again, the AMD frame generation delivers not only higher FPS numbers, but also a way smoother experience. Even at 1440p, where we have the 7900 XT delivering a way smoother experience than the 4080 Super as soon as you activate frame generation, even though it was 20% slower to begin with. And that still happens at 4K, where the AMD's frame generation is just better in terms of overall smoothness. And the final game is Call of Duty Black Ops 6, and the game still needs some more improvements as can be seen, as all the cards deliver around the same 1% lows with frame generation as they do without it, and that's obviously not good at all. At 1440p the 1% lows seem to have improved a lot on the AMD cards, but they're still quite unstable. But in terms of averages, the AMD cards just deliver a much smoother experience. Even at 4K, where the 7900 XTX delivers a much more enjoyable experience overall. And well guys, that's basically it. You saw the results, you saw the huge amount of data that I gave you, stock, overclock and so on. And as you saw, Even in newer games where people say that the RTX 4080 Super is just much faster than the 7900 XTX, like Unreal Engine 5 games, Hellblade, and we had some others, and still the 4080 Super is not much faster than the 7900 XTX. It just isn't happening. And as soon as we tweak both cards, the XTX is actually like 1% slower at 1440p and 0.5% slower at 4K. Now, if we're talking about productivity, that's a completely different story, and in terms of productivity, of course, the RTX 4080 Super is the best choice that you can get right now, unless you're using Linux. If you're using Linux, then the 7900 XTX and the 7900 XT are also good choices because you don't really need the Windows. The Linux subsystem on Windows, Rock'em is available, which will improve the performance way more, but in terms of general Windows productivity, yes, the RTX 4080 Super is just much better. It's just plug and play and enjoy performance in terms of productivity. In terms of rasterization, of course, the 7900 XTX offers around the same at a lower price, and for some people up to $200 might not make the difference, but $200 can get you more RAM, $200 can get you a way better CPU, $200 can get you NVMe's 1TB, 2TB, etc. So storage, $200 can get you a lot actually. Good points of the RTX 4080 Super: productivity just works better out of the box, plug and play. Sorry. It has way lower power consumption compared to the RX 7900 XTX that can go, depending on the model, up to 450 watts, while this model goes usually up to 350 watts. That's the most that I've seen at 4K, so 350 versus 450. In terms of really heavy GPU workloads, we're talking about 100 watts less. But on the other side, on the AMD side, we have a much cheaper GPU. We have 24 gigabytes of VRAM versus the 16 gigabytes VRAM on the 4080 Super, and we saw that in some scenarios that might be an issue, like with 4K textures in Space Marine 2, and in some benchmarks that some people made with Indiana Jones as well. 16 gigabytes just won't cut it most times. So there's also that. And in the middle term, if you don't really want to spend that huge amount of money, you have the RX 7900 XT. That is an outstanding price performance card, really. In some games it even matches the RTX 4080 Super, in some games losing by up to 20-25%, which is kind of normal because in some case scenarios it costs almost half of what the RTX 4080 Super costs. We're talking about $650, while in some cases the RTX 4080 Super, depending on the model, can go up to $1,300, so that might happen, and in this case you still have a good model for $650, which is, again, a great deal. And well guys, that's all for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe and share this video, as that really helps a lot. And we have the chickens, we have the dogs, it's a full house. Have a great new year and see you in the next video. Cheers.